13 years, he comes home a man of 32. And they started telling me I couldn't talk to myself.
In a television studio in Washington
And,
on August 28, 1963, a small group from Hollywood, California joined to give their own personally held views of the civil rights gathering which took place on that day.
Never once did you give him
Here, as citizens committed to the cause of civil rights, are
very sympathetic.
James Baldwin,
And yet I had to do something very difficult, Sidney.
Harry Belafonte,
He's intelligent and articulate, but he's also
Marlon Brando,
turned up.
Yeah.
And the problem I
Charlton
faced was
Heston,
human sympathy, but I had to be a relentless and
Joseph Mankiewicz,
get his story, and to be sympathetically implacable.
Yeah.
and Sidney Poitier.
Done.
But press him without being mean to him.
The moderator, David
Gentlemen,
Schoenblum.
I think that it's about time to begin our discussion. We're here in the studio today with 7 men who have 2 things in common. They are...
Good evening. Welcome to This is Revolution, the Mau Mau Hour. I am your host for the Mau Mau Hour, Pascal Robert. Welcome all patrons. Thank you for being here. I'm glad everyone could come. I hope more people join us. What we're going to do for this Mau Mau Hour, as you can see, we started with this video that I had seen many years ago on YouTube that took place right after the March on Washington. And we sent the video out through our Discord and our patrons, and hopefully the people who are attending this Mau Mau Hour got a chance to watch the video. How we're going to proceed tonight is that I'm going to give my 15 to 20 minute analysis of the particular relevance of that video. And then for the second half of the show, we'll take questions from our chat. I will read the questions and try to answer them relevant to the video. Now, hopefully you guys realize that the video that we showed in the beginning of the series, which you can find on YouTube and under the title of Civil Rights Roundtable 1963, has a whole bevy of men who attended the Civil Rights March on Washington, March for Jobs and Freedom. First of all, the first thing that obviously I think should be interesting to our audiences, particularly some of our women guests, is that there are no women at the table. Yes, it is a interracial table. There are black men and other white men, but there were no women, as if there were no women at the March on Washington, which we know is a fallacy. There were plenty of women, black and otherwise, out on at the March on Washington, who I'm sure would have been more than qualified to speak on their feelings. Now, understand something that I found fascinating about the video. The individuals that chose to speak on behalf of the attendees who were black were James Baldwin, Harry Belafonte, and Sidney Poitier. Now, you realize that Harry Belafonte had a long term of activism in the civil rights movement vis-a-vis his relationship with Martin Luther King. And even when the host of the show asks him and says, "You are one of Dr. King's lieutenants," quote unquote. James Baldwin, this is kind of the peak of his notoriety. He is also friends with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and is known to be the kind of black voice for the chattering class or the literati at that time, exuding the angst of the black community. And Sidney Poitier, at this particular time in American history, is kind of like the noble, honorable, striving black male who, in the wake of a change in the way in which black film is being depicted in Hollywood, away from the traditional stereotypical kind of Sambo-esque roles that we've seen in the past, this time with the rise of Harry Belafonte, now there's this kind of like noble, striving black male, black family image that was typified by movies like, To Sir with Love, what's the movie, the play, the famous play that he does, Raisin in the Sun, all of these depictions where you have this kind of like noble, striving kind of image that plays on the humanity of Black people, as if Hollywood has ever been interested in the humanity of Black people. My normal normal premise is that as people who are materialists or have left or Marxist politics, one thing about the civil rights movement that we are not often taught is the context of geopolitics in which the civil rights movement transpires. One of the things that we have to realize is that one of the driving forces of the success of passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act is not come out of some kind of American deep-seated desire to be just to Black people or to do justice or to lift them up. One of the major factors was that the United States was worried about its image in the newly developing newly freed, newly independent third and developing world in Africa and India, South America, and the appeal that Soviet communism and socialism would have to those countries. And if those countries tilted and pivoted to the left and became part of the Soviet bloc, it would mean problems for America's ability to use capitalism and expand its market share in those locales. So the actual utility of expanding American liberal democracy to include Black people was based pretty much on a couple of things. One, you have to remember, up until the early 1960s, almost 65% of Black labor in America were either sharecroppers or domestic labor. So what that literally means is that the majority of Black workers up until the 60s were almost living and performing the same type of tasks for work that they were going back to pre-Jim Crow, going back to slavery. We have to understand, what was the purpose of Jim Crow in the first place? Jim Crow was about economic subjugation to Black labor to persistently maintain its cheap labor status in Southern agriculture and domestic work. Why? Why was Jim Crow, which was typified by Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court case in 1896. Why was that necessary? Because in the 1880s and the 1890s, there was a movement during the time called the populist movement that large numbers of African Americans took part in through what was called the Colored Farmers Alliance, which was trying to work in association with a white organization called the Farmers Alliance that were literally so radical in their challenge to Southern bourbon capitalism that they were in the threat of destabilizing the capitalist political economy of the South. Jim Crow, again, typified in Plessy versus Ferguson, which caused separate but equal and also allowed the stripping of voting rights, was a ruling class hammer being dropped on poor and working class Blacks and whites who were trying to challenge Southern capital to make sure that they could not unite and use the political process to basically create a third party called the Progressive Party and dislodge the monopoly of the Democrats and Republicans over the political economy of the South. And what it did is that it basically relegated Black labor, who was now trying to use unionization and collective bargaining to affect seed prices and all types of sharecropping mechanisms, to liberate itself from the oppression of having labor extracted from it in sharecropping right after the Civil War, what the populist movement was trying to do was use the Colored Farmers Alliance and all those radical Southern Union-like movements to challenge that. And Plessy versus Ferguson basically brings a death knell to that activity and relegates black people to non-unionized Southern agricultural labor up until the 1960s. So Jim Crow was a regime of economic exploitation of largely black workers to enable to deny them the capacity to unify with white labor to challenge particularly Southern capital, and it was typified by the ruling class decision in Plessy versus Ferguson. Understanding that, one thing starts to make Jim Crow obsolete for America. One, the rise of technology through mechanized farming makes the need for Southern agricultural sharecropping to be obsolete. So there are now machines that are making the need for Southern agriculture obsolete, and we have machines that can do that. That's one. Number two, with the rise of Nazi Germany and Hitler in Germany, the hypocrisy of the United States calling itself the land of the free while having black people in America living in an apartheid-like regime, was basically a bad look for the U.S., and it started to cause the success of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in their argumentation for trying to expand black rights. Third, and the next major factor is the one I explained, was the Cold War politics after World War II of the United States being worried about the fact that the Soviet Union was going to be able to gain market share in the newly independent global South countries of India and Africa and South America, and taint the ability of the United States to do business in those countries. So the United States had to realize that it had to demonstrate to the world that it was working on getting beyond this racism stuff and making America a quote-unquote fair and democratic society. So understand, the change and the civil rights movement, the changes the civil rights movement brought about, were largely not done because the United States was interested in benefiting Black America or freeing Black America. It was because of the political economy of the lack of relevance for agricultural labor, combined with the bad public relations caused by the rise of Nazism, compounded also with the need to undercut the popularity of the Soviet Union in the newly developing world when the Soviet Union was trying to export revolutionary socialism to the world. In that context, when we watched a video of these seven gentlemen discussing the March on Washington, what is so fascinating is their liberal attempts to use American exceptionalism to say how the United States, only in the United States could a march like this happen. They literally say in the video, you could never have this in places like Moscow and Peking. Why do you think they chose Moscow and Peking? Because of the counter-hegemonic Soviet Union and Peking being China. So it was you can even see in the host's rhetoric that he used in his discourse that he says the whole world is watching. We have to let them know the whole world is watching. There's a YouTube. If there's a YouTube, you can go and search Nixon on civil rights, where it's literally a commercial of Richard Nixon in 1960, explaining this is the election that he's running in 1960 against John F. Kennedy, where he explains why the United States must pass civil rights. And he says, first, because it's fair. Yeah, okay, as if America ever cared about that. And then he said, literally in the video, America cannot win in the face of communism if we do not pass civil rights. The whole world is watching. You can check the YouTube. As a matter of fact, I might see if I can get the YouTube and put it in the chat and have my producer share it with you. But either way, it's fascinating how many Americans are completely unaware of the role in which the Cold War played in shaping the capacity of the United States to be able to actually pass the civil rights laws that we have today. And particularly when we try to have this romanticized notion that it's the open and honest, it's the open and honest American democracy that allows us to have these kind of changes. It's kind of ridiculous. Okay, we got the video. We're going to share it in the chat. Gene, we're going to have our producer share it with you in the chat. But Nixon is basically saying that, listen, the whole world is watching, and we cannot compete with Soviet communism if we do not expand civil rights. So again, back to the video of the conference of the 7 men who were watching. The next thing that I found interesting is that the way in which Harry Belafonte and James Baldwin are made to be the racial ventriloquist for the then population of 20 million black people, as if they can appropriately say what 20 million black folk feel or their opinions are. The fascinating, there's one point where Gene is going to play the Nixon video right now. Gene is my producer today, guys. Just watch this.
United States, Richard M. Nixon.
I want to talk to you for a moment about civil rights, equal rights for all our citizens. Why must we vigorously defend them? First, because it is right and just. And second, because we cannot compete successfully with communism if we fail to utilize completely the minds and energies of all of our citizens. And third, the whole world is watching us. When we fail to grant equality to all, that makes news, bad news for America all over the world. Now, the record shows there's been more progress in civil rights in the past 8 years than in the preceding 80 years, because this administration has insisted on making progress. And I want to continue and speed up that progress. I want to help build a better America for all Americans.
You know that the administration he's talking about is the Eisenhower administration, because he was Eisenhower's vice president. So he's saying Eisenhower, who was a Republican, has done more for civil rights in the last 8 years than we've done in the last 80 years. Don't forget that Brown v. versus Board of Education transpires under Eisenhower. So the point I'm trying to convey to you is that this was a bipartisan ruling class consensus that was rooted in the lack of need for Southern agricultural capitalism, as I told you. Also, lack of need for because of the rise of Nazi fascism, the bad marketing that it was for the U.S., and 3, the foreign policy disaster that Soviet communism meant for the world. Look, someone's got some good information. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. endorsed Eisenhower in 1956. How time has changed. So what I'm trying to show is that the video that celebrates this march on Washington that we were talking that caused me to have this conversation today was a complete liberal fantasy that tries to make it seem like the incorporating of civil rights into America's economic paradigm and political paradigm was because of some kind of greater liberal vision that goes back to Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, when America lives up to its ideals. And now the check, as Martin Luther King said, the Negro is cashing his check to the United States, and there will no longer come back insufficient funds. How did that work out? How did that work out? How did that work out when we had in 1964, the year after the March on Washington, we had an urban rebellion in Rochester, New York. Then we had an urban rebellion in Philadelphia. I have a list here of the urban rebellions. Rochester Race Riot, 1964. Cyprus, then we have the Harlem Race Riot of 1964. Philadelphia Race Riot, 1964. Watts Riot, 65. From 1967 to 1971, there are over 300 urban rebellions in the United States. So exactly how does this nonviolent vision of America being able to just heal its racial wounds going to just bring Black people to justice? We see that right now, when Black folk are basically returning to race-based policy out of their frustration with the fact that capitalism stripped them of 35 to almost 50% of their wealth in 2008, and with the rise of Black Lives Matter and the police killings of Black citizens on video, that there's a return now to a need for racial reckoning. Well, what is interesting is that if you look at the writings of Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph, they realized that the civil rights movement was not going to be enough to address the issues. I'm going to read something from my good friend Torrey Reed. This is an article he wrote in Dissent magazine that was published summer of 2021. The Political Economy of Racial Inequality by Torrey F. Reed. In 1965, in response to President Lyndon B. Johnson's anemic war on poverty legislation, the labor and civil rights leader A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin joined Leon Kersling, the former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, to draft a freedom budget for all Americans. Their $100 billion proposal, $1.4 trillion adjusted for inflation, would have established a living wage, a guaranteed employment through public works projects, and urban revitalization initiative. Randolph and Rustin were socialists who viewed racial inequality through the lens of capitalist labor and housing markets. They correctly anticipated that neither the 1964 Civil Rights Act, anti-discrimination measures, nor war on poverty would be capable of eliminating Black poverty. As Randolph asserted on the March on Washington, yes, we want fair employment practicing act, but what good will it do if profit-geared automation destroys the jobs of millions of workers, Black and white? So what that tells us is that Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph, who were two major generals, if you will, in Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights movement and war on poverty, realized that the civil rights acts that we were getting in the 60s were not enough to change the economic condition for Black America. And what did they demand? A class-based, fair employment, full employment remedy to solve that problem. So what exactly is going on with Black America now that they are shying away from a class-based concept like a federal jobs guarantee or a full employment guarantee through public works projects, but instead is doubling down on racial democracy, i.e. Black capitalism, i.e. race first policy, or say reparations, which will be a wealth transfer to the Black middle class, because all race reductionist policy has always been a wealth transfer to the Black middle class, because they're in the best position to be able to benefit from those programs. What exactly does it mean that instead of learning from the past, Black America right now politically is making demands still rooted in the same race-first paradigm that help facilitate the largest gulf of wealth among Black people when you have the top 10% of Black folk controlling 75% of Black wealth? So for me, that March on Washington video that we saw with those gentlemen illustrates to me how this liberal fantasy of the civil rights movement that we've been propagated for so many years to have us believe that all the fights are over and everything's okay, even though when Black America was transitioning out of Jim Crow into the capitalist economy in the early 1970s, it was it was basically transferring itself into deindustrialization, mass incarceration, stratification of economic development, broken families because of those economic realities, drug use, crime that persisted in a vicious cycle of social dislocation, all rooted in political economy, not because of some kind of cultural failing of Black folk, because the political economy forced them into the worst of the conditions of this country. Because why? Because American capitalism relegates Black people disproportionately to the reserve army of labor. And unless American politics and Black people who act politically are willing to root their condition in political economy, like Rustin and A. Philip Randolph and the civil rights leaders were willing to do, unfortunately, they could not get that bill passed, then we'll be stuck using these race reductionist formulas over and over again, and they will not truly find a way to integrate anyone below the top 10% of Black folk into the economy effectively. So I wanted to use that video as a means to find a way to address some of the shortcomings of the romanticism with the civil rights movement. And now what we're going to do is that we're going to take your questions in the chat. I will read them aloud, and I'll try to answer the questions about them. So please share, if you will, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Ask your questions in the chat. Let's see. Someone said propagated. Oh, Yuka Free said propagated in public schools. Pascal deprogramming me. Yes, Yuka, we do have a lot of propaganda in public schools about the civil rights movement. Okay, we got Strom McCullum here. Post-age of discovery, racial and ethnic ideology is and always has been a tool for the division of the exploited and the organization of capitalist production. That is true. Capitalism is premised, going back to Bacon's Rebellion, on keeping blacks and whites who are exploited by capital divided so that they cannot come together to challenge capitalism. We got a question from Shirley. The current, what you call the Black misleadership class, wants no parts in challenging capitalism. Shirley, you're absolutely correct, because the Black misleadership class, or the Black political class, gets its patronage, i.e. fatback and biscuits, by being acolytes to the corporate faction of the Democratic Party that is the most wedded to capitalism. So Jeremy is asking Pascal, will you bless us with your best Nixon voice? I am not a crook. How about that? So do we have any more questions? People coming in with the questions for the show. But yes, it's important to be able to navigate this, because in this age of quote unquote racial democracy, we're seeing people who are trying to double down on this 1972 politics as if it's going to be the answer to the question, when all it's going to do is further increase the class proliferation between Black elites, the Black 10% who own 75% of Black wealth, and the bottom, the bottom 90% of Blacks who are just working class and working poor. We had Richard Wolff on the show yesterday, and we were talking about black labor as the reserve army of labor in America, and he went in on how that's the case and how it works, and why thinking capitalism is going to be able to outlift Black folk is going to be a problem. Question we have from our producer: how strong is the Black misleadership class today? I think that there are fault lines in Black politics that are causing people, particularly people under 4, to question the efficacy of the black political models that they've used in the post-civil rights era in the 50-year kind of revolution. And I think that the ability of the black misleadership class and the black political class to maintain their hegemonic control over black politics is a little bit more up for grabs. Oh, I didn't see that question, Shirley. I'm sorry, I wasn't ignoring you. Answer my earlier question, Pascal. What do you make of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act and voter suppression laws? Is the U.S. not concerned about perception? I think that what gives the U.S. the ability to execute such laws without fear of global repercussions is because we don't have a counter-hegemonic force like the Soviet Union anymore that provides a model that can become popularized in trading partners, in the land of trading partners we have. In the 50s and 60s, the Soviet Union was basically offering full dominant economic paradigms that were going to challenge American capitalism. Today we have communist China, but communist China is a non-ideological trading partner. In other words, it doesn't make its relationship with its trading partners necessitating its people buying into communism. They'll do business with anyone based on whatever ideology. So part of the reason, Shirley, that it allows the American ruling class to basically not remedy these voting inequities is because there's not an outside country that's going to put pressure on the United States business interests and make them pay attention. We got a question from Yuka Free. Pascal, do you feel like your Haitian identity is alienating factor that lets you think critical about black politics? I don't think it was an alienating factor. See, this is the interesting thing about know about me is that I came to Haitian history and Haitian politics and kind of actualizing my Haitian identity through my affection for Black Americans and their struggle. My dad did not want to teach me about Haitian history, and he told me why. I asked him, because I told him after reading all this really great history, I was like, Dad, why didn't you tell me about Haitian history when I was a kid? He said, I'll be very honest with you. I was afraid if I taught you the history of my country, you would hate white people. And I said, knowing my dad was a very intense kind of guy, and I can understand why he would think that way, because if he conveyed the kind of tortured history of Haiti with the kind of intensity that his personality carried, I could see why he would be worried that it would affect me in a way that I would have like a lot of racial resentment towards white people, just overall, categorically. But so my point is that actually my affection for Black politics comes from growing up in a predominantly Black American neighborhood in Jamaica, Queens, going to college, pledging an African American fraternity that is known to produce people like Martin Luther King, Thurgood Marshall, Adam Clayton Powell, and being rooted in a connection in a kind of, upper middle class, from an upper middle class vantage, right? Because those politics are limited as well, because those politics will get you to romanticize the Black misleadership class or the Black political class. But it was through working my way through reading Black history and Black politics that I researched and learned about the importance of Haitian history on my own. So I've never felt alienated from Black politics or Black political thought or Black history. I claim it as my own. Plus, the connection between Haitian history and African American history is so tight when you know that people like Denmark Vesey and Nat Turner were modeling their rebellions of the Haitian Revolution. When you learn that free people of color in America in the 19th century were advocating for Haiti to get recognized by the United States, when you learn that thousands of Black Americans actually moved to Haiti to escape the U.S. from the Fugitive Slave Act and even before, you realize is that there's no reason to feel any sense of alienation at all. I look at Haitian history as a beacon of light for Black people globally, as I think all Black people should. And I said on another show, I said, for me, as a Black person, as it should be for all Black people, Haitian history is a sword and a shield. It is a shield in that it protects us from the lie that white people are forever to control our lives and our destiny. And it is a sword in that it reminds white people that their blood can spill if they think that we will tolerate them being in control of our lives in perpetuity. So for me, it's all interrelated. So I don't feel alienation at all. We got a question here from Zune Jones. Did the black leadership class or black misleadership class really have a choice considering what was done to black radicals via COINTELPRO and the national security state? It was a clear message. That's an interesting question. I will argue that the black political class or the black misleadership class doesn't do what it does because it's quote unquote sold out or it was so scared. I believe that they do what they do because it's their class politics. They are elites within the ruling class, power elite paradigm to an extent, and they do what they do because, frankly, it's good for their pockets. They get contracts, they get consulting agreements, they get relationships with these donors and these lobbyists. So when they resign, they can go into the lobbyist business and get their money. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a vicious cycle. Politics is a dirty business. So I think that if we look at them as class actors working in their class interests against the interests of the black masses, the black majority, then we will realize that we should not be spending our times worrying about whether or not they are quote unquote going to be loyal to the race or down with the people. They're going to fulfill their class politics. Shirley says, Pascal, your father was worried about your Dessalines gene would be activated. Yeah, he had a lot of the Dessalines gene, as a matter of fact. Got a question from Jeremy S. Question: is Dr. Paul McCombs, will he be coming back on the show anytime in the foreseeable future? I wanted to ask him about Althusser. I'm in contact with Paul McComb all the time. He's a very good friend of mine, and he's willing to come back on the show. We just have to choose the subject matter, and he will come on. He definitely was. A lot of people love to hear what he had to say. So I would love to have Paul on, and I talked to him a couple of days ago, so we can make that happen. Someone asked, "What about those genius grants?" Hey, people, race talk can be profitable. That's all I got to say on that. Do we have more questions? But so yes, I'm enjoying this little back and forth here. This little back and forth. Okay, we got one from Boerhaave. What do you think of Black Lives Matter being used as a rubric to advocate for improving the lot of Australian Aboriginals? Could such conflations be used to discredit the entire movement? Is that actually happening? Is Black Lives Matter being used in Australia to advocate for improving the lot of Australian Aboriginals? I mean, I would like to see how that politics actually works out and how exactly they have the political consciousness be able to wear to address the issues of Aboriginals, as if Aboriginals and Black Americans are even interchangeable on all levels. As if I'm very skeptical of Black Lives Matter because I felt that it was nothing but an attempt to replicate the Black misleadership class model with better gender and sexual orientation politics. And I think that I've been correct in my assessment. I don't think that those kind of race reductionist kinds of models for quote unquote Black empowerment do anything but line the pockets of the leaders and just make them be another voice that's going to be at the table asking for the fatback and biscuits from the political ruling class of the Democratic Party. Shirley asked a very interesting question. If it's basically their class interest, why aren't there more Black Republicans? Because I believe that the Democratic Party has maintained the patina of seeming the illusion of caring about Black people, and that the Republican Party has been so overt in its hostility. I mean, all you have to do is look at Lee Atwater's speech where he talks about how, we can't use the N word anymore. We can't say N word, N word, N word anymore because that's too obvious. So now we just got to say busing or welfare and talking about the Southern strategy. So I think that the Republican Party has been more overt in being the party of reactionary white politics in a certain way, and I think that the Democrats have used the charade of racial being racially magnanimous to keep black people in their coffers politically. Yuko Free asks, can you trace the Black Lives Matter to the civil rights movement of the 60s, considering the founders of Black Lives Matter weren't even born in the 60s? I think that would be a hard sell. I think Black Lives Matter is a manifestation of a lot of the race reductionist politics that comes out of the early 1970s and believing that that's a solution for black people, but even that ended up being a dead end to a large extent. Normadine Murphy says, good historical analysis of the movement around the March on Washington. The black political class is losing people across all ages and demographics. That's very true, Normadine. Mostly people under 40, but I can see they're getting weaker. Yog asked the question, isn't one of the Black Lives Matter leaders pro-charter schools? I can't confirm that. I'm not absolutely sure either way. It's possible, but I can't absolutely confirm that. But this is a good chat here. You guys are asking some serious questions. Keep flowing with keep going. We got a few more minutes. I think I want to end this in about 8 minutes and wrap it up. But please, if you haven't watched the video in question, do so. Who is the most important black political leader today? Oh, I think we need to stop looking for black political leaders, and we need to start looking for creating a black political constituency to good politics. The who's the leader of the day question is the least question we need to ask, and who's meeting the need? Who is creating a black constituency rooted in materialist politics should be the question to ask. Someone said Joe Biden. If you ask him, I doubt that. I doubt that. Umar Johnson. Wow. I think that the whole traditional black leadership paradigm is something that should be up for grabs, and we should really move away from that and try to create a working class centered black politics that allows, yes, movements, not personalities, that organize black folks around the issues that are rooted in their material needs. Boer Have asks, is there even theoretically a transnational black consciousness? I don't believe in racial essentialism, and I don't believe that there is a quote unquote, is there a transnational white consciousness? I don't believe that at all. I don't necessarily think there is a national quote unquote black consciousness in America. I think consciousness is an individual manifestation of your worldview, and you can create a collective political consciousness through political education. I think you have trends we can get. During the Black Power era, there was a large consensus that was made around certain kind of politics of return to, dashikis and, moving outside of European paradigms for clothing and aesthetics. But again, was that really a politics, or was that just kind of an aesthetic attempt at cultural nationalism? Question from M. McKay. What do you think of the revolutionary internationalist movement of from 1993? And how do you think the Maoism and Black Panther Party relates or contributed to it? Ooh, that's a very good question. I'm not that familiar with the revolutionary international movement of 1993. I think that the Maoism of the Black Panther Party was an interesting. I think that the Black Panther Party in the 1960s really was getting into third worldism as a product of reading a lot of Fanon, focusing on a lot of Mao, particularly focusing on the role of the peasantry in the revolution. And I think that was a good conscious raising experiment and experience for Black people at that time. But I think that making an analogy between the condition of Black people in America and third world colonies falls short for various reasons, and that's one of the main reasons why I'm not a fan of internal colonial theory. That's something I would have to hash out more over time, but I think the analysis kind of falls short. Shirley with a question. How can Black leftists compete against all the Black capitalism propaganda? Shirley, you asking the real hard-hitting questions today. Do you see all this black capitalist propaganda that's out here, Shirley? I mean, they're really doubling down on this belief that black capitalism is going to save everyone, as if this wasn't tried before in the 1970s. It's I think what the black left has to do, we've got to work on organizing again around political education with working class and poor black people, because they are being bombarded, particularly through the hip hop community and the entertainment community. Once again, as I said in that piece I wrote about Clarence Avant, the way in which black popular culture works to demobilize radical politics around black people. I think that that's a perfect example that we're seeing with the way in which black popular culture and black celebrity is being used to try to curate support for black capitalism amongst black people. So, okay. Choice fantastic. Do you have any tips for cultivating and developing cadre? Meet in meet spaces. Go to libraries, churches. Organize around common spaces with people. Develop reading groups. Do community service together. Create building institutions for each other, and find a way to share in spaces where you all can get personally close as well as just politically close. Who do I think would win in an arm wrestle between Gene and Cuba? I think Gene will win. Yuka Free says, "This is revolution, ruined gangster rap for you." Sorry, don't. I mean, listen. I'm not saying you can't listen to gangster rap. I'm just saying understand, the larger agenda here. Strom McCullum, look at the medium household income and industrial workforce conditions of black belt countries, though. Understood. It is at the very least global South adjacent. Okay, you know any good books on Patrice Lumumba? Ooh, I haven't read a book on Patrice Lumumba in years, but I don't have off the top of my head. But I'm sure when we get Milton Almaty on, we can definitely do that. Board Hayes, agree with Shirley. Here in the UK, I almost never meet black people interested in politics other than black professionals with a casual interest. Okay. Master Living said, "Who's getting Mau Mau? Don't you have to Mau Mau some?" The Mau Mau hour can be an hour of political education. It can be the discussion amongst about a current political phenomenon, or it can be a straight Mau Mauing of someone or some political actors. Today, we decided to use the Mau Mau hour to do political education. The first Mau Mau hour was an introduction about me as a person and what brought me to radical left politics. The second Mau Mau hour was a remembrance for Glenn Ford. And today's Mau Mau hour was about that film on the March on Washington and trying to put the civil rights movement and the civil rights movement in general in proper context. You guys just want to see the bloodletting of me just going in on someone in the Mau Mau hour. I'm not saying that won't happen, but all I'm saying is the Mau Mau hour is a process. It's more sophisticated than just, verbally going off on someone and trying to take them out, politically speaking, that is. Kirsten Cinema. We want to Mau Mau Kirsten Cinema. Well, I can understand that. She's doing some pretty bad stuff for the Democrats, for working people overall. So I can understand why someone feels like she deserves some Mau Mauage. Oh, why you want to Mau Mau a comrade, Yuka Free? Why you want to Mau Mau hate Katie Halper? She's a comrade. Come on, man. What did she do? What did she do to deserve that? Choice fantastic. Dialectical materialism. I like that. I like that very much. Do we have any more questions from the chat. Matthew Helton, Maoist is what brings us together today. Last questions. You can freak say it's a joke. All right, so you don't say I didn't want to know if you were coming for Katie Halper there. Okay. Let's see. James Phipps, has anyone ever seen freshman senator hold up their president's agenda and suffer zero consequences? I think we're going to see it now, James. I'm not a Democrat, so I don't know how you all Democrats feel about this. But I think we need to stop believing that this electoral politics is going to be the answer to the question. That's true. LBJ was an asshole, but he would never stand for that. He would give them the famous LBJ treatment, the treatment when he gives them the talking down and the looking down to get his agenda passed. Borjave asks, how much faith should we have in the Academy for Politics today? Child, that is a touchy question. Listen, there are people I respect their scholarship who help me give good analysis. My friend Tori Reed, Cedric Johnson, Adolph gives me good analysis. There are a few folk that we've had on this show from the Academy. Richard Wolff. There are a few folk that we've had here. Sharice Burden-Stelly from the Academy who's given some interesting history. Black and otherwise. So I wouldn't throw the Academy out with the bathwater. I don't think we should look for it for politics. Willie Leggett, very valuable from South Carolina. I think we should look for it for information and education on how to frame our politics today. But still be skeptical because we know, academics. Best leftist history podcast? This is Revolution, baby. Come on now. What you think I want to give that to somebody? This is Revolution podcast, James. What you trying to do here, man? Come on now, brother. All right, we going down to the last 2 minutes here. My friends and comrades, I hope you guys enjoyed this Mile hour. We got into the weeds. Vaughn Vlog is good. Shout out to C. Derek Vaughn. Borjave. The Vaughn Blog is good. Shout out to C. Derek Vaughn. But as we say, again, I'd like to thank you all for coming on. And we're going to wrap this up now. I believe we are going to be, tomorrow we're going to be showing the stream for Richard Wolff at 9 p.m. on our channel. And I think Jason and I are going to do a patrons only afterwards to address the Richard Wolff show. So tomorrow will not be a live stream. It'll be Richard Wolff at 9. So go to our channel at 9 and y'all can see the Richard Wolff interview. So I hope you guys enjoyed the show and found it informational. I hope you guys liked it. Shirley, I'm glad you enjoyed it as well. Keep supporting This is Revolution. Become a patron. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. Buy the merch. Let's get to 1,000 subscribers so that we can actually come out to California to do a live show. Tell your friends to subscribe to the show as well. Thank you all so much. And I believe it is safe to say that we are